Hi everyone, Chris Green, the history chap, 2 minutes late on a Friday. So massive apologies. The reason I have been putting together I think a really exciting video actually. I get carried away with these videos, and it's coming out later today. All right, just stick with me on this one. 55 days in Peking, or 55 days at Peking. The real history behind the epic film starring David Niven and Charlton Heston and Ava Gardner as well. So set in Peking, or Beijing as it's now called, in 1900 during the Boxer Rebellion. And I'm telling the story of the Boxer Rebellion and the real siege of the foreign legations in Beijing or Peking. Okay, and how it varies from the film, because surprise, surprise, it varies from the film, not in a nasty way, although I'm never quite sure why the character that David Niven plays and the character that Charlton Heston plays have different names to the real historic characters in the film. But nevertheless, some great ones, and there's some really good little twists in it as well. There is one I'd love to tell you now. I would love to tell you now, but I'm going to leave it to till you see it later on, because I've been humming a tune, or several tunes actually, from another film, which I'll mention in my talk. You're going to have to wait and see what it is, aren't you? So anyway, welcome everyone. I'm just having a quick look at the chats, and where are we at? Hello from Chicago, lovely. Hello, Charlie Manson, nice to see you again. Jen Ingle, hello. You're being blown off a hill here in Cumbria. Actually, I have to say, no wind in Worcester and beautiful blue skies. Makes a blinking difference after what we've had recently. Morning, James from Houston in Texas. Yeah, a long time since I've been in Houston, but great place when I was there. Leslie, South Carolina, one of my loyal and regular supporters. Thank you very much indeed, Leslie. Lovely to see you. Norfolk, Peter Smith in Norfolk in the UK. Uncle Heavy, good to see you here. I no doubt you'll be contributing as usual. Where we get howdy ho from Thailand, Cummins Archive. Wow, that's impressive. Yeah, again, long time since I've been to Thailand. In fact, I've only been there once. That was for my honeymoon. And as I'm now divorced, that obviously worked well, didn't it? Germany calling, expat. Guten Tag. Where are we at? Jenningle, lucky you, Chris. Guess you're talking about the weather here rather than in Cumbria, where you're being blown off a hill. And from Buckinghamshire, Kieran's from Bucks. Well, lovely to have you all. And I always say this, it's one of the things I'm always intrigued, actually, just where people live and where they come from. It's I don't know what it is. Maybe it's been brought up in South Africa, where you're always intrigued where people came from. I don't know, but yeah. So I am always love to hear. Oh, now we've got Prakash from Singapore. Lovely to have you as well, Prakash. Gold Coast, Australia. You're just rubbing it in, just because I said we've got blue skies here in Worcester. It's obviously freezing cold here in Worcester. Billy Brown, hello from Northern Ireland. I never cease to be amazed just at the amount of people who are viewers and followers, and indeed follow my podcasts as well, from all around the world. So it's and Uncle Heavy. It's sunny but windy and cold here in Northamptonshire. Timothy from Sheffield, thank you. We could keep going. This could be like this could be like the Oscars, couldn't it? I could keep going there forever and a day with you here. So I won't do that. As a way of introduction, for those of you who maybe are coming on for the first time and you've seen my History Chat videos, this is slightly different. My lives, the History Chat, obviously huge amounts of research, a lot of script writing, take hours script writing. Someone's asked me recently, and I can't remember, definitely wasn't Leslie, I think it might have been Darren Marsh down in Australia. He asked, how long does a video take? Well, not these live ones, but like 55 days at Peking that you're going to see later today. I would say 20 hours, probably a bit more per video. I would consider myself incredibly lucky if I got 2 videos out in a week. So it does take a lot of time. So this is totally different because I'm just talking to camera. So a little bit jazz, as I call it. We go off down tangents. This is an opportunity as well for you to basically interrupt by sticking comments in the chat bar, which of course you can't do on my nice videos, my full-length videos, as YouTube call them. And by all means, please do. Any questions, any pet comments, anything you'd love me to talk about in the future, just put it in there. That'd be great. And of course, I do keep looking over and chat away to the chat. So anyone who, if this is not your cup of tea, if you were hoping to have a beautifully crafted video, yeah, please go and watch one of my other videos. Or I tell you what, if you've got a bit of time, go and watch 55 Days at Peking, the film. It's on YouTube, about 2 hours worth. And by the time we finish it, you'll be just about in time for me to launch my talk, proper talk, later today. So there you go. So as I say, what I'd like to do is share a little bit about what happens in British history, or what has happened in British history during this week, back through the years. But I'll also share with you a few other things. I'm going to try, normally we go for about an hour. I'm hopefully going to go a bit quicker than that, because what I'd like to do is put out QA Library. Thank you very much indeed. Very generous of you. And you enjoyed my Julius Caesar video. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what I was going to say was, I need to crack on a little bit today. Don't want to shortchange you too much, but I do want to get 55 Days at Peking out. I've also got to get my newsletter out. And I've also got to prepare for a talk that I'm delivering tomorrow for a charity fundraiser for a church up in Cheshire. And I am speaking about Dad's Army, the caste's real wartime service. So, which of course some of you will know, I've done talks around that here on YouTube. So really goes to prove that, whilst I give a lot of time to YouTube, and you've all found me through YouTube, I do a lot of other stuff now with the History Chap as well, as I say, delivering real live talks. So bear that in mind, actually. If any of you are members of any organization where you have guest speakers, and you think, actually, I bet Chris would be quite a fun guest speaker to have, then give me a shout. At the minute, I have to be honest, only seem to be going around the UK. But if any of you from, if Leslie or anyone decides they want to invite me to North America, by all means. I've seen Thailand, Singapore, Gold Coast, Australia. I'm up for any of them. I think that the transport costs might be interesting when I bill you. But seriously, I'm doing those talks. I do a podcast every week. I have a newsletter, free newsletter that goes out every week to my History Chat, the people that sign up through my website. I also do, this week, I'm currently doing a series of talks for an organization called Rest Less, tend to be for retired folk, seniors. And it's an online thing, lots of different speakers doing all different things. I am one of their more popular history talk speakers, and I've been running a series about the House of Stuart, or at least the House of Stuart, the Stuarts in English history. So from James I, we've done the Civil War, we've done the Restoration, we've slotted in Oliver Cromwell. This week, I did a talk all about William and Mary, the Glorious Revolution. And next week, I'm finishing off the Stuarts with Queen Anne. I've been a bit tongue-in-cheek. I've called it Queen Anne more than a chair. And we'll be talking a little bit about that and touching on things like the Battle of Blenheim. So if any of you are interested, look it out. Rest Less. I'm guessing it's restless.com, I think, is their URL. So yeah, I'm doing a lot of stuff, and so bear with me, but I thank you for all your support that you've been giving me. So let's kick off with a couple of dates, and then we can come back into one or two other things like the Julius Caesar video and where I'm going to take all of that stuff. And I'm just quickly looking before I do any more. Boots on the table with Dom. Lovely to see you, mate. And Dom, thank you. Don't mention your name, Pike. Thank you. We're into Dad's Army quotes immediately. Love to hear more about the Commonwealth Forces battles. Michigan, good afternoon, or yeah, good afternoon as it is in the UK. Good morning to you as it is over in your side of the pond. Are you doing any more official YouTube office things like you did around Christmas? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, QL Library. YouTube office things. You might need to just explain that a little bit more for me, because I'd love to answer your question, but I'm a bit confused. But that's because my head's been in 55 days at Peking. Afternoon, Chris. You'd be great on a on a cruise. Oh yeah, I'd like that. And funny enough, I'm actually looking at that. I'm touching base with a booking agency who do cruises because I think cruises would be great fun. And in fact, I know I'm a bit green with envy. Actually, there's two guys I know down in South Africa. Both happen to be South African speakers. We've got Dean Allen and Rob Caskey, and they're both speakers on cruise ships. Very different stuff, but history sort of Dean tends to talk about the history of sport, which is interesting, but he's broadened that out. Anyway, I'm just quickly reading. Uncle Heavy's put quite a long one here. I'm neither a revisionist nor an apologist for the good, the bad, and the ugly of British exploits around the world. I try and steer a middle line. Thank you very much, Uncle Heavy. Steering a middle line is actually quite dangerous. If you go one way or t'other, at least you know half the people are going to be with you, and the other half will hate you. But I do try and, I do believe that history is nuanced, isn't it? At the end of the day, and every time we British think we've done something good, someone else will think it's bad. And when because actually, how do we view the Germans in the Second World War, for instance? There must have been a lot of Germans who were almost fighting, my country, right or wrong, rather than I love Adolf Hitler. There were others who certainly supported Adolf Hitler. It's one of those ironies that at the end of the Second World War, wasn't it? No Germans had ever been Nazis. And yet, we know that back in 1932, not the majority of Germans, but the largest segment of Germans voted for the Nazi Party in the Reichstag elections. So, people change, and everyone has different perspectives and reasons for thinking or doing things. And so, yeah, thank you very much indeed, Uncle Heavy. Anyone here watching Cruising the Cut? I'm a sucker for Britain's canal history. That'd be quite a good one to do, wouldn't it, John? Canals, and also the railway history as well. And my family, I've done a bit of family tree. Don't know if anyone's done family trees here, but mine, I've got no one sexy. If I ever became famous and they did this, who do you think you are sort of series on TV, they take one look at it and say, oh, actually, can't we find someone else who's more famous? Because my lot, we're all sort of just working class, including navvies on the railway, actually plate layers on the railway through around Bedfordshire and that area. And in the Bedfordshire contingent, we had such fantastic people as straw platters. That's women who made the boaters, straw boaters in places like Luton. And I had those as well. I did have an actor. There is an actor from Victorian times, James Green. He was he was a comedian, and his wife was a comedian as well. And James Green was in a massive play in the West End. It's only because I've done the research. I'd never heard of it, called Peep a Day. Peep a Day was like sort of the Les Mis of 1860s, 1870s London, and he was really proud that he was in Peep a Day. It was a big thing, and he was so proud that he actually named his son, my great grandfather. He actually named him Charles Peep a Day Green. Yes, my granddad was very embarrassed that he had to call his dad Charles Peep a Day Green. But there you go. So Peep a Day. But there you go. Right. Anyway, let's crack on. I said we'd get into some things. So 28th of January, 1547, Edward VI ascends the throne. Edward VI was the son of Henry VIII. He was actually the son of Henry VIII and Henry VIII's third wife, Jane Seymour. And Edward VI came to the throne. He was a teenager, and he only lived a few years. I haven't got all my dates in front of me, but he only lived a few years. His father had died he'd broken with Rome, Henry VIII, very famously, but has sort of always been a Catholic at heart. Edward VI was actually out and out Protestant. So he was despite the fact that everyone talks of Henry VIII being sort of the start of the Protestant Revolution, which he sort of was because the Church of England broke with Rome. It was actually Edward VI who was the standard bearer for the Protestant cause. He genuinely believed it, whereas Henry VIII sort of just pretended to believe it because it suited his political purposes. And but Edward VI becomes King of England in 1547. 28th of January 1896, the first person convicted of speeding in the UK. And this is a great one. He was convicted of speeding. His car was caught doing 17 miles an hour. And that was classified as speeding at the time, and he got his speeding ticket. So I always like to think that that was one of the greats for in British history. On a military one, let's go on to the 29th of January. The Victoria Cross was instituted. The Victoria Cross instituted by Queen Victoria, hence the name, during the Crimean War. And she wanted to acknowledge the bravery of soldiers, no matter what their rank. Prior to the Crimean War, officers were given one medal and commonal soldiers ranks were given another one. The Victoria Cross was going to be for anybody and for both services. Although interestingly, up until the First World War, Royal Naval Victoria Crosses were on a blue ribbon, very dark blue ribbon, almost like an indigo ribbon, and Army Victoria Crosses were on the famous red ribbon. And during the First World War, that changed and all the Victoria Crosses became red ribboned. And the first person to actually be recommended for the Victoria Cross was a sailor, not a soldier, during the Crimean War. It's actually, he earned it in the Baltic Sea. The Crimean War, just as a digression, we all focused on the Crimean Peninsula. Obviously, that's where it gave its name from, wasn't it? In what's now, arguably, is it Ukraine or is it part of Russia? You take your pick, and I'm not going to open that one up here, but certainly the Russians control it, and Putin believes it's Mother Russia. Ukrainians believe it is part of Ukraine. It was occupied, hasn't it? But anyway, you know where the Crimea Peninsula is, and it's in the Black Sea. And obviously the bulk of the land fighting took place there. But of course, the British had a Royal Navy, the French had a navy, and indeed the Russians had a navy. And there were operations in the Baltic as well, principally to stop the Russian Navy leaving their ports at Kronstadt near modern-day St. Petersburg and sailing out of the Baltic, either to menace British shipping and French shipping around the North Sea, or indeed coming all the way around, sailing through the Mediterranean up into the Black Sea and turning the tables on the Allied forces in Crimea. So the Royal Navy in particular, small French contingent, but mainly it was the Royal Navy, were sailed into the Baltic and basically tried to hole up. Ideally, they wanted to go to bring the Russian fleet out to have a battle and sink it, but the Russians were too canny for that. So actually what the Royal Navy spent most of its time was shelling various forts, mainly actually in modern-day Finland, which was part of the Russian Empire at the time, the Duchy of Finland. And it was during one of these shellings that a live shell landed on one of the British Royal Naval ships, and a young man by the surname of Lucas grabbed the live shell and put it in a barrel of water and put it out. And for that act of valor, bravery, he was nominated. He was mentioned for the Victoria Cross. He was at the very first Victoria Cross ceremony. The very first Victoria Cross ceremony was carried out in Hyde Park in London, and it was carried out by Queen Victoria in person. She sat on a horse and she was giving out her Victoria Crosses. He actually wasn't the first person to technically receive it. Lucas was the first person to be nominated for it, because what they did was basically Royal Navy. They had all the people, lots of people had been nominated by this stage when she finally did her award ceremony. And what they did was they said that the Royal Navy is the senior service. So we'll do all the Royal Navy Victoria Crosses first, then we'll do the Army Victoria Crosses first. And within the Royal Navy, we will do it by seniority. So the most senior person will get the Victoria Cross first. Lucas was only I think he was a midshipman, so he was not seen as the most senior. There was an officer ahead of him. So he was, I believe it was the second person to actually have a Victoria Cross pinned on his chest. So there you go, Victoria Cross, instituted in 1856. Let me just have a quick look at where we're all going here. Youngest recipient of the Victoria Cross was Albert Ball. I will be doing a talk about Albert Ball because he appeared in, just by brief name, in one of my other videos. I did a talk about the voluntary auxiliary detachment, which were the women who served as nurses in the First World War. And of course, there were hospitals all around the UK. So most of the VAD women, some of them went and served closer to the theatres of war, but they also took over lots of cottage hospitals and things in Britain where men were being brought home to recuperate, one of which was Trent College in Long Eaton in Derbyshire. Trent College is still a private school, and it was the alma mater of Albert Ball. Albert Ball had left Trent College only a few years before and was now, at that moment in time when the VAD nurses were in there, Albert Ball was a flying ace in the Royal Flying Corps. So I will come back and do a proper story about Albert Ball. I hope you appreciate it, Leslie. Just bear with me on that one, but it's bubbling towards the top of the pile. Okay. What else we got here? Michael just said, based on the Crimean War, it's the story where one of the first where common soldiers were celebrated. Yeah, I mean, and I think you're probably right. I think common soldiers got a bit of a nod in things like the Napoleonic Wars, but it really was a nod. For the first time, I think you're right. Crimean War really brought it to a head, and not least actually because I think two things happened. Number one, there was an incredible amount of suffering. Because of the harsh weather conditions, Russian winters. Secondly, by some of the less than effective logistics that the British Army had, which exacerbated the Russian winter. And the other thing was that for the first time we had what we now call war correspondents, writing for the newspapers, going there to the Crimea, being on the scene and writing reports. And those two things came together. So you had stoic soldiers who fundamentally were suffering, being let down by the logistics, enter Florence Nightingale and all that at Scutari Hospital. And you had newspapers writing about it, and people back in Britain were able to read about it. And I think you're absolutely right. Common soldier, really good. By the way, if you want a good book about common soldiers, let me just give a shout out. I know I've done it before. Ian Knight. Let me just grab his book while I'm here. Ian Knight, Warriors in Scarlet. It's all hello, go that way. It's all about soldiers in the early part of Queen Victoria's reign, really up to Crimean War. A great book. He doesn't just talk about officers. He talks a lot about common soldiers as well, the ordinary soldiers, and the basically the lives they were leaving behind them as well. Because why would you join the Victorian Army and go to somewhere like the Crimea? Well, all depends on what the heck was happening in your home life and indeed in your economic life, depending where you came from, especially agricultural workers, agricultural Britain going through massive changes in Victorian times. And it was no longer the labour intensive industry it always had been. There's also several agricultural depressions during the period. Anyway, there you go. We had all of that. Let me just come down here. Francesco, good afternoon to you too. Where are we at? There's a channel called Redcoat History. Redcoat History. Chris Parkinson, very good channel. Recommend him. We're looking to do some sort of collaboration in the future. Just got to decide when. And Chris has had one or two things happening in his personal life down there in South Africa recently. But yeah, good one. Just bear with us. Like the Roman video. Hopefully more to come. Thank you, David. We will talk about the Romans in a while. Okay. I am just trying to give people a little bit of the courtesy, if you're writing comments, of reading them. Okay, so just bear with me. I know it's a bit boring for everyone else, but just keep me going. I'll tell you what the hell's going on. Victoria crosses were cast from old captured cannons, so the original VCs would be rare. Don't know about today. Well, I certainly know that the last time they did a test on some of the metals, I think it was during the Second World War, they realized that it looked like the metal was from captured Russian cannons, but Russian cannons that had been captured in China in the various expeditions that the British had in China. Oh, by the way, did I tell you I'm doing a video that's coming out later today, 55 days at Peking? Right. Thank you, Lee. Last survivor of the Crimean War died in April 2004. Not sure about that one. Hugh de Mortimer's just asked, Chris, have I seen Crimea: The Last Crusade by Orlando Fiers? No, I haven't. Can't recruit British soldiers today, apparently. Expat saying, I think, I have heard actually that it's harder to recruit. I have heard from people with recent forces experience who are saying, yeah, a lot of youngsters now don't see having lots of discipline as a career option. But there you go. Thank you, Quell Library, for that one. I will look that up. Thank you very much indeed. Francesco, 55 days is a great subject. Well, I hope you think so. I'm going to get it out later for you. And someone else is now saying 55 days at Peking. 55 days at Peking, not in Peking. More China British videos from David's asking. Well, that would be super. And in fact, funny enough, I do a little piece a little bit of a Vox poll in the 55 days at Peking video later, where I just say, if you want to hear about the Opium Wars, please say yes in the comments. So when you watch it, please make sure you put a yes in. And by the way, these things, YouTube love comments. The YouTube algorithm quite likes comments. So if any of you are watching my videos and you think, actually, stick a comment in, even if it's a thumbs up or a well done or a yes. They all count. YouTube like them. All part of the game that we have to play, and I'm willing to play it. Right. Thank you, Michael. You're saying US are having a hard time meeting recruitment goals too. And Charlie Manson is also basically agreeing from an RAF perspective. Thank you very much. Uncle Heavy, yes. Put them in YouTube. Do lots of them on the videos. What is significant to British history regarding the film 55 Days in Peking? Well, the British were there. The British commanded the siege. Won't give the game away. And of course, the British were commanded. They were part of the 8-nation alliance army that relieved Peking, and General I've got a brain freeze. General Gasly was the British commander. Lieutenant General Gasly was the commander of that, and in fact, there was a failed expedition under Admiral Sir Edward Seymour. And by the very name, you can guess he was Royal Navy and British. So the answer, Jim, is the British actually had quite a lot to do with it. And don't forget, David Niven was in the film. I mean, that's not a reason for it. David Niven plays the British minister in Peking. And so Sir Claude MacDonald was the real historic character. And Sir Claude basically commanded the defense of the diplomatic quarter in Peking in 1900. So hopefully, Jim, that gives you a few ideas as to why the Brits and 55 Days in Peking are related. But it is part of a multinational effort, in fairness. Although plenty of other wars the British have been involved in multinational as well, like Korea. Second World War would be one, wouldn't it? Right. Do the Battle of Armageddon, 1917. Okay, Invisible Ray, I'll add that to my list. Right, I think we're starting to go around some any plans to cover the Mau Mau uprisings in Kenya. Craig, yes, I might cover them. They're sort of on my list of things that could be covered. It's not top of mind at the moment, but I would, I mean, don't forget, that's Mau Mau is something to do reasonably sensitively, because I have Kenyan friends. And they have very firm views of the Mau Mau insurgency, or as they will call it, war of independence. Okay, and this is all about perspectives. Everyone has different perspectives, but someone mentioned earlier, I try and steer that middle course. I don't try and be revisionist, and I don't try and be an apologist to the thing. So I'll do it in a sensitive way. But one interesting thing about the Mau Mau debates was that there was obviously an internment camp at Hola, and certainly some brutalities took place there, if not slightly worse, for Mau Mau prisoners or suspects. And what was interesting, there was a big debate in British Parliament, and the Conservative government was slated. Not surprisingly, the opposition went for them. That's opposition's role in a democracy, isn't it? But someone from their own Conservative backbench went for them and delivered an absolutely stunning speech, which fundamentally said, would you do this in Europe? Would you treat people like this in Europe? And if you don't, then why on earth are you treating them in Africa like this? And that's pretty left wing, isn't it? And pretty in your face from a Conservative member of Parliament. That Conservative member of Parliament who delivered the Hola speech was none other than Enoch Powell, who history has sort of, I'm going mad here. History has somewhat has a very different view on race relations. So isn't it funny how people turn, history turns, and we see people as well. There you go. Okay, I've got that one there. Hi, was the Battle of Peking the first time the Americans invaded a country? No, Kenny, the first time was, I think you'll find, the first time Americans ever went abroad was in the Barbary Wars. And they landed at Tripoli. The Marines landed at Tripoli, and hence in the Marine song, from the shores of Tripoli, that's where it comes from. They were there in the Barbary Wars, and if you want to find out a bit more about that, I have done a video about the Barbary pirates, which is what the war was about. Actually, they had a white slave trade. Or white slaves from Britain. They landed in Cornwall, they landed in Ireland, they abducted fishermen, and indeed they actually landed in both Cornwall and in Ireland, and abducted villagers as well, stormed villages and took them off to North Africa, to the slave markets in North Africa. So yeah, have a look for it. I haven't got a link in here, but the Barbary Pirates, I think it's called the Barbary Pirates, England's White Slaves or something like that. I can't remember. It's had quite a lot of views. There you go. Right, where are we at? 30th of Jan, let's keep cracking on. 1649, Charles I is executed. The only king of England ever to be tried. He was tried for treason, high treason, and executed. He was executed in the morning of the 30th of January, 1649, outside Whitehall Palace. There was some scaffolding built, and effectively in what is called Whitehall, where the cenotaph is. He wasn't executed where the cenotaph is. The Whitehall is where the cenotaph is. He was executed outside the banqueting hall of Whitehall Palace. Famously, he wore two. It was a cold day. He wore two shirts so that he wouldn't be seen to shiver in the cold, and it be mistaken for the fact he was scared to meet his maker. He had come from St James's Palace. He was brought across St James's Park to Whitehall, came through Whitehall Palace, stepped out onto the scaffold, which was outside the banqueting hall. They'd raised the scaffold up. And he famously made a speech which said, I go from a corrupt to an incorruptible world. Oh, sorry, a corrupt to an incorruptible crown, where there's he basically was at peace, with his maker. His head was chopped off, only time that's ever happened. There, rather than cheering or anything, when Charles's head was chopped off, there was a great sigh from the crowd. And somewhat bizarrely, some people ran forward and dabbed their handkerchiefs in the blood as a sort of bit of a souvenir. I mean, that is macabre, isn't it? But there you go. People would probably be taking selfies if that was happening now, wouldn't they? So I guess, no more weird than people doing selfies at some event like that nowadays. but that was Charles I. Interestingly, this week in British history, on the 2nd of February, which is, today, 2nd of February in 1629, he was actually crowned king. So he had been, in this week, Charles, it sort of comes full circle. He was crowned king of England and he lost his head as king of England as well. Where are we at? Let's keep going. 30th of January, 1965, Winston Churchill's state funeral. The last state funeral for a commoner in England, or in Britain, sorry, beg your pardon. Famously, of course, his funeral procession came up the River Thames in a barge, and all the cranes in the London docks, which no longer exist there, but they all dipped in salute as he went past, which is quite a nice touch. And of course, his state funeral took place, and then his coffin was taken by train out to Oxfordshire, and it was buried in Woodstock, in the parish church at Woodstock, just outside Blenheim Palace, which of course is the stately home, the seat of the Churchill family, starting with John Churchill, the very first Duke of Marlborough. Winston Churchill was actually let's get it right, his grandfather was Duke of Marlborough, but his father was the younger son. So he was just Lord Randolph Churchill. And then there was Winston. And meanwhile, the Dukes of Marlborough went down the other side of the family. So he came from aristocratic roots. He wasn't filthy rich, but he definitely came from those aristocratic roots. And that's why he ended up back at Woodstock at Blenheim. There you go. How are we all doing? Someone's put ghoulish, which I'm guessing you're talking about dipping blood. Old Silver's talking about, I'm guessing that's the dipping blood in King Charles's blood rather than Winston Churchill's funeral. But you Brits put up a great show for these types of events. Yeah, we're talking about state funerals now, I'm guessing, not executions. But thanks, Michael. I think we do. I think it made me sort of quite proud when Queen Elizabeth II died. Just how incredibly well orchestrated our pomp and circumstances. We really do it incredibly well. Oh, thank you. The crane drivers had to be bribed to dip their cranes as Churchill's coffin went by, says Uncle Heavy. I didn't hear that. I haven't heard that before. It doesn't totally surprise me. I was surprised, if anything, that they'd all spontaneously, as working men and trade unionists, had done that for a Conservative. But I know he'd also been the wartime leader. But we're very good at pageantry. We are indeed, folks. And where are we at? 2:40. The time is rocking on. Just want to pause here before we get into any of the other pieces of this week, just to say thank you for all very kind words and support we gave for last week's video about Julius Caesar's invasion of Britain. I want to start doing a few more of these stories. People say, one of the things they love about what I do, and people have said this on the Restless programs, which I've done, like for said earlier, I've been doing this series for Restless, all about the Stuarts. I've previously done one actually with them about the Wars of the Roses, the Anglo-Saxons, and the Tudors. So we're sort of I'm racking them up a bit there, aren't I? And people say, one of the things we love your individual stories. And of course, I think a lot of you do on YouTube as well. But actually, we love almost like a series, and almost like putting it into context, because you, Chris, put it into context the way that I've heard of some of these events, but I've never really put them all together. And I was never taught like this at school. And I would like to just do a little bit more of a sort of a chronology of Britain, where I can take you back to places. We might not be going blow by blow. There's a very good podcast out there, actually. Well, I think it's quite good. Jamie, British History podcast. Jamie, he's been doing it about 10 years. He's still only got to about Henry II now. So he's definitely he's on a man on a mission. But don't intend to go that slowly about things. But I would like to take people back, because I think the story of Britain is amazing. And I know I've got locked into not least a lot of the 19th century stuff and a bit of First and Second World War, but and a lot of military stuff. But I just think the story of Britain is incredible. And one of the reasons I like doing British history is not because I think it's fantastic. I mean, I do think it's fantastic, but that's only principally because I live here. And the main reason I think it's fantastic is because I am fascinated by what's around me. The scenery, the landscapes, the buildings, why pubs are called what they're called, why roads called what they're called. What's that war monument there? All those things. And it's around me. I don't have to travel to Mexico or South Africa or Australia to see that bit of history. So that's why I love it. I love those stories. And I'm a great believer, whether it's British history or anything else. Maybe this is why I like going down the middle of the line, is it's only by understanding the past that we understand where we are today, and also where other people's perspectives are. So, using the Boxer Rebellion in China in 1900, and most certainly the Opium Wars in the 19th century, can you see why some Chinese are really quite anti-Western? You don't have to agree with them, but can you see why it is? Can you see why, when America and Britain have ousted governments in places like Iran in the past, in the 1950s, why the Iranians might be quite anti-British and American? And I'm not saying you have to agree, but I do understand it. And that's one of the things I love. I'm taking a bit more of an interest in Irish history at the minute, because I have friends from the South who, they've got views on Irish and British history. And funny enough, they see things very differently to me. And I'm actually trying to see the world from their perspective and understand what's going on. Because whichever perspective you come from, that creates the world that we're in at the minute, doesn't it? Wow, that's a bit profound for a Friday afternoon. Lucky I'm not in a pub. Hey, we'd all be crying or something by now. Getting lots of nods here. Thank you very much indeed. The Border Reivers, fascinating period of history. Thank you. I like British history because it's tied to Portuguese history for the last 600 years. Absolutely. We've, it's the oldest, I think officially it's the oldest alliance the English have is with Portugal. And interestingly, look, I tell you what, Francisco, let's throw it in. It became a Portuguese, the treaty, the original treaty, I believe, happened during King Edward III's reign in England. 1st of February, 1st of February, 1327, Edward III is crowned King of England. Edward III, son of Edward II and grandson of Edward I. This is obviously a period in Plantagenet history where they felt that they needed to be quite original with the names. A couple of things, just to keep it in there. Edward III, if you know your history, Edward I, granddad, was the hammer of the Scots. He was the man who defeated William Wallace. He was the man who conquered what remained of independent North Wales. His son, Edward II, was the complete opposite. He wasn't warlike and basically was deposed eventually. Edward III was a chip off granddad's old block. Edward III, warrior, ruthless. Indeed, he was ruthless to the extent that his father, when he was put to one side, his mother, Isabella, Queen Isabella, was having an affair with one of the Mortimer family. And young Edward came into Nottingham Castle. Isabella and Mortimer at Nottingham Castle. He entered Nottingham Castle with some of his henchmen. They came through a secret passage through the rocks of Nottingham. Nottingham's littered with lots of caves and things. And they seized Mortimer and took him away and put him kangaroo trial, and he was executed. And to this day, supposedly in the caves, you could hear Isabella's screams to her son, her pleads to her son, do not harm poor Mortimer. And that's the Mortimer's Hole, as it's called in Nottingham, comes out near a great pub, Trip to Jerusalem. So any of you ever going to Nottingham, have a look. It's right underneath the castle. Great one. So anyway, that's Edward III. And that was a beautiful segue there from Francisco for my salute to Portugal. But I mean, Portuguese history is fascinating as well, isn't it? With all the explorations and stuff as well. But and that's what I love. Sarah drives Sarah mad. We went to Lisbon back in October, and she must have thought, great, there's no history. Well, there is history in Lisbon, but Chris won't know about it. Wrong. I've done some homework, and I took her on a few little trips around the city. She's very good, isn't she, Sarah? She's she's got the patience of a saint. Any plans to cover Welsh history? Yes, sorry, Declan. Getting back to this whole idea of like, I want to start to tell the story a little bit of British history, and we'll start. And lots of you have asked, by the way, if I'd go back pre Julius Caesar and do something about the ancient Britons. I'll use that as a title. The answer will be yes, I will do that for you. And equally, we'll then take a step forward and we'll look at Claudius' invasion of the Roman invasion and conquest of Britain, or at least conquest of most of Britain, in AD 43 or through the 40s. That will link beautifully, I think, into a story of Boudica and her rebellion. But also, we've got some, I think we've got some other stories we can cover off in there as well. And I'd love to do that, whether we just do it chronologically or whether, as I say, I can just keep referring you back and saying, look, if you're interested in this, you might want to look at this particular video before or to get a feel. I don't know. But I think there's some great stories. I think people will appreciate it. And hopefully we might even be able to start to tell the story to younger folk, because quite a few of you, especially if you're Brits, you were parrot-fed some of this history when you were younger. Probably can't remember much of it now, and it was all a bit of a hodgepodge even then. And let's face it, when you're 13 and you're chasing the girls, do you really want to listen to a boring old history teacher speaking? Now we're all at that age where we've got time and we can choose which subjects we want to learn about, and we're all liking history, aren't we? But I'd love to actually share this with some of the younger folk. And it's really interesting when I do talk to younger folk. And I was talking to some youngsters, I'm patronizing, some young adults at a recent YouTube creators meeting where I, trust me, was the oldest person there, or the oldest creator there anyway. And we were talking, and loads of them were like, God, I didn't know any of this. This is brilliant. This is actually really interesting. And I'd love to be able to do that and actually share people that actually history isn't all about necessarily watching Vikings on TV or whatever, or linking it to those programs. If that's how they get their entry point into history, let's build upon it. If they came into history of the 1920s and gangs and Oswald Mosley through Peaky Blinders, great, let's build upon that. Because, some of us got into the Zulu Wars because of Zulu. And we all know that historically that is not very accurate, but it was the way in. And I'd love to be able to tell that story and just link to people and say to people, and that is why, for instance, that is why certain things happen in Britain now. That's why that road is there. That's why that port is really important and that one isn't. That famous one, Chester, in the northwest of England, was the most important port in England most important port in northwest England until the English Civil War. And it was only after then that this deep pool at a pool of water on the Mersey called Liverpool became a small fishing village, became the major port, mainly because Chester was silting up, the River Dee kept silting up. That's a story in its own right. Both of them are stories, aren't they? That one was the top dog and why it's no longer, and why the second city, has actually gained and became one of the hubs of the British Empire. Anyway, we're digressing. So if you don't learn your history, you're doomed to repeat it. Yeah, I think you are. I don't think it necessarily repeats absolutely perfectly, but I think you need to understand where you're coming from. Warts and all, actually, because actually maybe you don't want to repeat some of the stuff. In fairness to my German friends, knowing about what happened in the Second World War and rather than airbrushing it from history means you might choose not to go down that route again. If you wash it, if you delete it, there's a danger you do it again, or of a similar fashion. And that's one of the dangers, isn't it? If we don't talk about things like slavery and we just say no, we don't talk about those people, we'll take their statues down. And and personally, I'm not that fussed one way or the other, actually, or the statue. But if you don't talk about it, if what you want to do is airbrush it out, there's a real danger that someone in Bitcoins or someone in artificial intelligence can help or can create a situation where we all think they're an absolute hero, and we don't think, oh no, actually that's very similar what you're doing, paying all that money into children's charities and a hospital in our town, but actually where did you get this money from? This sounds very like Edward Colson down in Bristol. Well, if you do away with that bit of history of Bristol, what reference point do we have? Maybe I'm just talking a load of crap, I don't know, but I do think about these things sometimes, and that's where my latest thinking's got to on that sort of thing. Thank you very much, expat. Thank you, Adrian, as well. Whilst history doesn't repeat exactly, it does echo. Yes, I'd agree with that. I think that's true, Uncle Heavy. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, anyway, let's crack on. So we've talked about Edward III, we've talked about Charles I. Let's move forward, finish off the week on the 3rd of February. That's right, that's where we are, isn't it? 3 things, actually, that I want to share with you for the 3rd of February. First one is 1014, 3rd of February, 1014, Sweyn Forkbeard dies. Now, Sweyn Forkbeard is an uncrowned Danish king of England. He was proclaimed king. He was proclaimed king by the English, but he was never crowned. He was proclaimed king at Christmas in 1013. So he was king for 5-6 weeks. Long story short, he was king of Denmark. He had a running war with the English king Ethelred the Unready, or Ethelred the Unread, as he was actually called in Saxon times, Anglo-Saxon times. Fundamentally, at the end of it all, long story short, yeah, we'll keep the short version. Okay, he basically conquered all of England. Ethelred the Unread, called the Unready. And it makes you sound like he wasn't ready for the Danish things. That's actually the wrong modern interpretation. The Anglo-Saxon form is Ethelred the Unread, which was basically the ill-advised, the badly counselled. So it wasn't that he was unready for things. In fact, actually, he was quite ready. He built up a fleet of ships. It was just that his fleet of ships, he unfortunately had he placed his trust in a henchman called Edric Striona from Mercia. And Edric Striona was the most slimy weasel you could ever possibly have. He changed sides constantly, swore loyalty to Ethelred, and then immediately sort of left the battlefield so that people like Sweyn Forkbeard could win. And he also entrusted part of his fleet to a man from Sussex, who then took the fleet and went off pirating up and down the English Channel, whilst Sweyn Forkbeard's invasion fleet came and landed in England. Funnily enough, that pirate's son was called Godwin. He became ultimately Edward the Confessor's main henchman in England, main power base, and his son was Harold II of Battle of Hastings fame. There you go, nice little wing. Anyway, Sweyn Forkbeard basically defeated Ethelred. Ethelred was holed up in London. London was the only place that was still loyal to him. It also very conveniently had the old Roman walls around it, and Sweyn couldn't get in, although Sweyn didn't really care because he had the rest of England. So thank you, Ethelred the Unwise. Yes, unwise, ill-counselled. It's sort of it mixes across from the Anglo-Saxon translations, Uncle Heavy. So yeah, you and I are on the same page here. And Sweyn Forkbeard, basically, Ethelred fled to Normandy. His wife was Norman. She was called Emma of Normandy. She has a role to play quite a lot going forward in English history as well. And they took his sons, 2 young sons, with him over there. And English resistance, for what it was worth, was left to his eldest son from his first marriage, a man called Edmund Ironside. But Sweyn was then all the English nobles basically said, you're the winner. We've actually got this bloke who we really didn't have a lot of time for, and basically he's clearing off. So you can be king, Sweyn, which is what Sweyn wanted. Sweyn went back to his headquarters in Gainsborough in Lincolnshire, and it was there that he died. Some people say he fell off a horse, and it wouldn't be the first English king to fall from his horse and die from the consequences. William Orange, William III, who I was speaking about this week with Restless, that's what happened to him, complications from this fall. And but interestingly, a myth came up about Sweyn Forkbeard that it wasn't a fall from his horse. It was Saint Edmund the Martyr. Those of you who know your Anglo-Saxon and Viking history will know that Edmund was king of East Anglia. When the great heathen army came, he was either killed in battle, which is what the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says, or if you come from the church sources, he was martyred like Saint Sebastian because he wouldn't renounce his faith. And Edmund, king of East Anglia, was tied to a post, and the Vikings fired lots of arrows at him to see if he would survive, if God would protect him. And strange enough, he died. And for his faith, he became Saint Edmund. Saint Edmund, the king martyr, is how he's known in the church. And he was effectively England's first patron saint, never called that. We didn't have patron saints at the time. But he was the saint and the saint's flag that was carried into battle. And even when St. George usurped him, even at the Battle of Agincourt, we talked about, cry Harry, cry God for Harry, England, and St. George. St. George's banner was at Agincourt, as was Edward the Confessor's and St. Edmund the Martyr. Anyway, where are we getting to? So St. Edmund the Martyr, venerated as this martyr who had been killed by Vikings, Danes. And the story is, or the legend, is that Sweyn Forkbeard didn't fall off his horse. He was sleeping one night, and Edmund the Martyr, St. Edmund the Martyr, came back from the dead and placed a spear in him, stuck a spear in him, which you've got to say, it sounds a bit better than falling off your horse, doesn't it? I mean, there's got to be a film in that, falling off your horse. Poof, who's worried about that? Being killed by a ghostly saint. That's cool, isn't it? And that's a Good Friday story, if ever there was one. I'm sure Superman fell from his horse. Yes, indeed. You see, horse falls. They're not very, quite a few of them, actually, I'm afraid. Imagine being a saint after failing the God test. Yeah, I think the way the church did it, Lee, was that he hadn't actually implored God to save him. He was willing to, carry his faith to the death. Don't forget, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says Edmund was killed in battle. But that's boring. That's a bit like falling off your horse, isn't it? Who wants that? Declan, what do you say, mate? Are the counters just a disguise for assassinations? Could be. I don't believe. For instance, William of Orange, William III was an assassination, but could be. Of course, the ultimate assassination was probably on a hunting trip. William Rufus, William II, was hit by a stray arrow in the New Forest, just fired by supposedly the best archer in his entourage. That's a bit of a blow, isn't it? Equally good that his younger brother just happened to be in the hunting party with him, and I kid you not, left William dead on the floor of the New Forest, rode off to Winchester, secured the mint, and then rode to London and secured a coronation for himself, while his brother hadn't been given a proper burial. So if ever you want a conspiracy theory, Henry II getting the throne of England, got to be in there, hasn't it? People getting speared crossing a bridge from below seems to come up a few times as well. Yes, Lee, in particular at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, another story I want to tell. Right, anyway, let's crack on, because I said there were two other dates, okay? So 3rd of February, 1461, the Battle of Mortimer's Cross. This was in the Wars of the Roses. Wars of the Roses pitted two factions of the Plantagenet family against each other. And we had the Lancastrians, King Henry King Henry VI, and the Yorkists, led by Richard of York. Okay. And Richard of York was killed at the Battle of Wakefield, and his young son, Edward Earl of March, was now the leader of the Yorkist cause. He actually hadn't been at the Battle of Wakefield because he was down in the family lands. They were heavily related into the Mortimer family. The Mortimers were principal English lords in the Welsh Marches, which is the Herefordshire, Shropshire area bordering Wales. And he was down at Ludlow Castle raising more troops to go and take to his father, who was, well, he didn't realise he was fighting the Battle of Wakefield at that time. He thought he was still preparing. So he was raising an army, got the news that his dad had been killed in Wakefield. And oh, by the way, you're now the great Yorkist hope. And at that moment, another Lancastrian army came out of Wales to meet him and to put an end once and for all to the Yorkist cause. So Dad was dead in Wakefield, and now the allies in the Yorkist cause, in the Lancastrian cause, came out of Wales. They were led by a man called Jasper, or it was actually Owen Tudor, and his son, Jasper Tudor. Owen's grandson, Jasper's nephew, was a man called Henry Tudor, who you hear a lot more about in English history. At this stage, however, this was a Lancastrian army coming out of Wales led by Owain and Jasper Tudor. And Edward took his army, young Edward took his army out to meet them at a place called Mortimer's Cross, just southwest of Ludlow, just across the border into Herefordshire, I think. I stand to be correct. I'm sure it's Herefordshire. It's one of these weird ones where the borders. You Americans, you don't understand this because you just have straight lines, don't you, for all your states? England, we have Wales and Scotland as well for that matter. We have county lines going all over the show. I love the fact that for me in Worcester to drive to Oswestry in Shropshire, I have to pass through Wales to get there. That's how the road goes. It's this little bit of England that sticks into Wales. So, and the same thing. Okay, so I stand to be corrected. I'm sure one of you will tell me because you're all clever people, but I think it's Herefordshire. Anyway, Mortimer's Cross. The big thing at Mortimer's Cross was that he turned up. Now you got to remember, you know your leader's dead. You've now got his kid leading the army. How impressed are you as a soldier? That, oh my God, this is you. And oh bloody hell, we've got the Tudors coming out of Wales. And by the way, Owain and Jasper Tudor were pretty renowned warriors. Actually, they weren't they were courtiers, but they were courtiers based on the fact they could actually fight as well. So you now have this, and then just for good measure, a strange climatic event happened. It's called a parhelion, and parhelion is basically where the atmosphere, the sun actually breaks into three. It looks like there are three suns in the air, in the sky. Okay, now you've got to remember, we are in medieval times. That is like the ultimate EGBGs, isn't it? If ever there was a bad sign appearing, apart from the fact that your leader's dead, you've got the Tudors facing you, and you've got the kid in charge of your army, you now got three weird suns in the sky. And his army wavered. And young Edward, Earl of March, rode along the front. Young Edward, he was a teenager, rode along the front, and he pointed out that there were still three sons left, three sons of their leader left. He was the eldest. He had another brother who became the Duke of Clarence, and a younger brother who we all know as Richard III now. Okay, so those three sons represented the three sons of Richard of York. Oh, and while we're on the subject, those three sons, folks, represent the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. God is with us in this battle. And so it turned out at Mortimer's Cross, the mighty Tudors and their Lancastrian army were put to flight, destroyed by the young Earl of March. And Edward IV came on. He probably actually one of England's best military commanders as a king that we had, actually, if you look at his track record. Long story short, just to finish it off for you, Owain Tudor fled all the way to Hereford. He was chased all the way to Hereford. You don't let your main man get away, do you? And in Hereford, he tried to take sanctuary in Hereford Cathedral. He was pulled out and he was executed in the middle of Hereford. And that was the end of Owain Tudor. Owain Tudor, who, by the way, had married the widow of Henry V, Victor of Agincourt. So there you go. So that's Mortimer's Cross. So let me just have a quick look here, because I bet I've let a cat out to the bag here. Glenn Hayes, I'm a Yorkshireman. Can we have Richard back, please, Leicester? I really want to go and see Richard III's grave in Leicester Cathedral, actually, or tomb, should I say, in Leicester Cathedral. Now is the winter of our discontent. Thank you, Leslie. There we go. Edward, George, and Richard. That's right. George, Duke of Clarence, Edward, and Richard became Richard of Gloucester Wasn't at the time, of course. The old Roman roads are straight-ish. You're absolutely right, Sarah Jane. Why on earth we didn't use the Roman roads as county boundaries? Lord only, well, there were reasons. And it was all to do with land ownership and numbers of houses and numbers of people and huts. But anyway, sort of. Right, let me finish off then today, because I said I was going to keep it short, and once more we've gone over the hour. This is becoming over the top, isn't it? But Momsley wine for George. Leslie, you're on an absolute roll. I'm not going to go there. We'll keep that story for another day. Right up into modern times, 3rd of February 1960, Harold Macmillan delivers the Winds of Change speech to the South African Parliament in Cape Town. Probably his most famous quote, apart from "You've never had it so good," but the Winds of Change, where he basically was talking to the Afrikaner-led government, the nationalist government of South Africa, or nationalist-dominated Parliament and government of South Africa, and basically said, "You can't, times are changing. There is going to be black majority rule in Africa, and you can't stand against it." Although, interestingly, of course, the apartheid government did stand against it for the next 30 plus years until Nelson Mandela was released by de Klerk, the last National Party president of South Africa. So the Winds of Change speech delivered in Cape Town, which you've got to say, is a reasonably brave thing to do by Harold Macmillan. He could have delivered it in England, but he did go right to the heart of the apartheid government and decided to deliver it there. But there you go. So there we go. That's your lot for this week in British history. If you like the idea that I'm going to, go back into a little bit more British history, take us forward on a bit of a journey, please either drop a line here, or indeed drop me a line if you want a decent comment from me, or indeed expand your views on things. Drop me a line through the website. Okay, there's a contact form there, or contact button. Hit that, and at least we can get into a conversation. Because immediately this finishes, the live finishes, I lose all these chats here. Okay, so thanks. That's why I take a bit of time trying to answer you as we go. Thank you very much, everyone. Is it around that time that started obeying transnational Club of Rome, Chris? I don't quite know where we're at there, Glenn, but maybe drop me an email. Great watch. Thank you very much. And as for great watches, look out. I am going to put up the 55 Days at Peking is going up this afternoon. I've just got to finish editing it, then I've got to compress it, and then I've got to load it up into YouTube. So where are we now? I'm thinking we're going to be going with that one at 4:30 UK time, about an hour and a half away. Might be more like 5 o'clock UK time, so 2 hours. Might not. Maybe I should under promise and over deliver for you. So let's say 2 hours. A matter of interest, does anyone want to do it as a what do they call it, a premiere, where you can do this commenting on the side, or shall I just release it out and just say it's out there, folks? You watch it when you want. What do any views on that one? While this is your moment to influence what the hell I do in the next 2 hours. It's all gone quiet. That's good. That's good. Right, folks. Sometime in the next 2 hours. Oh, and now we've gone premiere. Premiere, yes. Up to you. Thank you very much, Call Library. Let's see how we go. Premiere. Well, let's see if we can do a premiere. That's really going to depend on me getting my bum into gear and getting the editing finished. As I say, it's a bit of a convoluted process, but I will get there. And then I still need to do the blinking newsletter. And I also need to upload 55 Days at Peking into my podcast as well. So I've got my work cut out today, haven't I? And those of you who were with me last week, you'll know I'm already in the doghouse. Remember, it was Sarah's birthday. I was going to go to Nantwich for the Civil War reenactment, the Battle of Nantwich. Didn't go. And before loads of you thinking either you're under the thumb, Chris, or you're so nice, Chris, and lovely for Sarah's birthday, I only didn't go because I was desperately trying to get that blinking Julius Caesar Invades Britain video out, which went out on Saturday. So I sort of got like a half brownie melt for Sarah because I was around on Saturday afternoon rather than in Nantwich. But I didn't get the full brownie point because she didn't see me most of the morning. So I must make sure that I do not screw up either for tomorrow or indeed for this evening. Big bunch of flowers tonight, Friday. Tend to do that anyway, but this week it's going to be a bigger bunch than normal. So look, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you enjoy it. I do love these chats. I would love it. And funny enough, I am still thinking about possibly organising a live in-person event sometime in the year, later in the year, probably September, October time, probably in the Midlands, might even be Worcester, where we meet up. I can deliver a few talks, new talks for you, especially for you. We can have a bit of a chat like this, but rather than chit-chatting on keyboards, we can actually speak face-to-face. And we could even go off and do a bit of a battlefield site or a tourist spot. I mean, Worcester's great. We've got the Commandery. We've also got the Battle of Worcester vantage point. You can see that. I could even do a talk around the Battle of Worcester, Civil War. And of course, you've got Worcester Cathedral as well, which is amazing. So we might do something here and do something like a full day Saturday, and then in the evening people can peel off, or if you brought your partner, you can go for a meal. But then those of us who want to stick around, grab a beer, maybe grab some curry or something. I don't know. Does that sound interesting? But I do love this, and this is one of the things I really love about sharing my passion for history. And someone asked me this week, what's your purpose in life? And I thought, it's sharing stories from British history. It's as simple as that. Educating and enjoying. And if I can entertain you as well as inform you, quite frankly, I think I've done a good job. And whether that's YouTube or podcasts or live talks, talks to U3As, got one of those coming up soon. In fact, funny, I forgot a voicemail this morning from D-Side U3A up in North Wales who want me to go and speak there. So anyway, folks, have a great weekend. Thanks for joining me. See you later for 55 Days at Peking. Take care.